Hello again and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, March 31st, 2016. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Another week filled with big news in the world of mixed martial arts. Wow.
You were worried there were not going to be any topics this week.
Every week I have the same fear.
Talking about Kimbo Slice's kid knocking that guy out, right?
Absolutely. All right, no time to waste. Let's get right into it. Of course, you know these guys. This is the A-Team. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, and I don't know if you have been noticing, but a goatee has been percolating.
It's just whatever.
All right.
Well, it is just whatever. Yeah. Take a gander.
The man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com. Of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. We have to start with Jon Jones, guys. I mean, what a week it has been for the number one contender in the UFC's light heavyweight division, the king without a crown, the former light heavyweight champion, who is scheduled to be fighting for the belt in 3 weeks' time. On Monday, on the MMA Hour, he announces to the world, and I want to talk about that strategy a little later on, but he announces that late last week he was pulled over by the cops in Albuquerque, ticketed 5 times for various offenses, the main one being drag racing, didn't get a speeding ticket, and shortly thereafter a video emerges of him having a pretty tense conversation with the officer who pulled him over. Just moments ago in Albuquerque, he met with a judge and was essentially told, okay, if you're back here again, if you violate your probation, your 18-month probation again, and we have to talk to you again, it's going to be trouble. But in the end, he gets 60 more hours of community service. He has to do some anger management courses, and also he has to do some more driver education courses. Also, anytime he wants to drive, he has to clear that with his probation officer. Did he get off easy? Is this fair? What do you make of what the judge today decided on?
If he were a non-celebrity and had to go before a public defender with that record, do we believe he would be able to retain his license at a minimum? I certainly do not. I don't know that he would be retained in prison. I don't think it's really at the taxpayers' or the state's interest too much, given the nature of the crime we're talking about. Revving engine, maybe having a muffler that was, intentionally used to make more noise, whatever the case may be. I just want to make that known. But it's interesting. I don't even know what you say about this anymore. And I mentioned on the email listserv at work, and I put it on Twitter. That picture of him with the cuffs and the jumpsuit is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And especially with the timing. This was, the Charm School rebound tour is over, and it ended with a thud quickly. But to me, you're asking what is wrong with this. I don't find the punishment to be particularly helpful to him. How does he still have a license, even if on conditional use of it? Makes no sense to me. They say Jon Jones doesn't learn his lesson. I'd say the government is right behind him. They don't learn their lesson very much either. And more than that, to me, look, MMA fighters are guys who inherently, and ladies, accept some measure of risk. But the St. Pierres and the Silvas and the ones who really transcend, they compartmentalize it for professional purposes. He seems to not be able to compartmentalize taking risk seriously. He doesn't take it seriously, and there's this steady law enforcement creep on his life. And I don't know if this is the end of it, but it is troubling, to say the least.
Yeah, you're a dad of little kids. I know you have little ones. I have one who's a teenager now, but
Luke has a dog.
I got two dogs.
And
a cat.
And a cat.
So as parents, we've all said to our kids, if you do that again,
yeah.
And then what happens? They do it again.
Yeah.
And then you have to back, well, I'm going to count to 3, and that is the perpetual thing that happens as parents, and this is what the judge sounded like to me. I mean, in hearing what the judge told Jon Jones. And in some ways, I think it's kind of appropriate because I think Jon Jones is acting like a child. I think that he has not grown up. He is a big, strong man and the best mixed martial artist we've ever seen. But come on, I mean, all the stuff that he's been going on. He has 2 strikes against him. He's on probation for 18 months. He's 6 months into that. He gets into one traffic situation that he just gets cleared from, and the next day he's out there. Now, whether you want to say he was drag racing or not drag racing or whatever, revving his engine, I mean, you get pulled over for something you don't think you did. This has happened to all of us at some point in our lives. But the way he went way he went off on that police officer, and the cop was certainly no professional either, the way he handled it. But Jon Jones, just swallow it. Just swallow it. Just sit there and don't make it worse. I mean, clearly the situation is such that he just doesn't understand that there are repercussions for your actions, and we've just seen the beginning of it. I think it's only going to get worse.
Well, the original indictment on Jon Jones, the one that goes back the furthest, was that he was an insincere guy. He sort of was not this guy who you took too seriously. He was always two guys sort of giving you two looks at all times. And here he was, and I know you visited him in Albuquerque, and he's kind of given assurances after all of his brush-ups in the past, all the things he's gone through, having the belt stripped from him, everything else. You want to believe him. You want to give him the benefit of the doubt. He just keeps burying the benefit of the doubt. He keeps taking that away from himself by just putting himself in these positions. And you're right, I don't think he takes it very seriously at this point. I think you always think that the next thing happens, that it's going to be the one that gets through to him. But what was it after his hearing? It was like this whole drag racing thing was like 2 days after his hearing for the other thing. And you're just, to me, that just tells me nothing is getting through to him. And I feel like with him sort of being now in a position where he's going to be really under scrutiny, like from law enforcement and everybody else, this next year is going to play out. I mean, I just don't believe he can keep himself out of trouble during that time, and that's a real concern for the UFC going forward as well. If he's going to be the champion, April 23rd or whenever that fight is, for that next year, they're going to have to say, like, I hope our guy is available for us, because I feel like at any point he just might not be available anymore. He might just put himself in a position where he's going to be behind bars.
Do you remember that Instagram video he put out? He's like, hey, I got a fight coming up, I'm going to re-get my title, and they're talking about tickets, like the Allen Iverson, they're talking about brackets. Yeah. How glib of him to do that. How utterly glib to take these infractions, which again, it's not the most outrageous public nuisance. He's not out fist fighting in bars. Okay, fine, man, but you're at a point now where, that's why I said this on my chest yesterday, that's why they call it the straw that broke the camel's back, not the steel ton.
Right.
It's just, you're at a point now where you have given away every opportunity to remain on some relatively neutral ground. And to then get on Instagram and be like, this is no big deal. You don't get it. This is super, super serious for your life, for your family, for your career, and you're going to let it go down where you're in cuffs 3 weeks before your biggest fight of your life. If you're in cuffs ever in your life like that, you have made disastrously bad choices. There's just no doubt about it. And then I know he wouldn't make it about this one anymore now that he's been in cuffs, but just go back to that, everyone defending him like it's no big deal. No, it was a big deal. And your attitude at the time was, they're not going to get me. Well, they got you.
His tone was, I'm sorry, his tone even on the show when he was kind of getting out in front of the news on the MMA Hour was similar. He was downplaying it to the point where I was like, I wasn't sure how big of a deal it would be, to be completely honest. When I listened to that, I was like, is this going to be one of those things that sort of blows up in like a little bit of time here, or is this going to be like a slap on the wrist and people won't notice? I didn't really know what to expect, but he downplayed it, and to me, it'd be interesting to see his demeanor, I guess, coming out of it. We're the ones, I think, the media, because I've written this column that I wrote recently. I feel like I've written that column 3 or 4 times, just kind of going through like he's on these eggshells. We're the ones placing the eggshells under his feet. I don't feel like he feels like he's treading on eggshells at all. I feel like it's the media and it's the people, his fans that are like, hey man, you're screwing this all up. Do you see that for yourself? And you just don't get the idea that he feels that way, like himself.
Yeah, this is the MMA Beat, but let's talk baseball for a second. You go up to bat, the pitcher throws the first pitch, and you swing from the heels, trying to hit the ball out of the park, and you miss. Oh, now it's strike one. Next pitch, it's not to your liking. You think it's low and outside. The umpire calls it strike two. Now you got 2 strikes on you. You got one more shot here. Are you still swinging for the fences? You're probably going to choke up. You're going to cut your swing down a little bit. You just have to use your head. This is how professionals act. And Jon Jones, it isn't a big deal to get pulled over for license plate infraction, or these are minor things. But when it comes one thing on top of another, and you're on probation, and you've just gotten something cleared, he doesn't understand. You started to dwell on this. I think I would be frightened like hell if I was the UFC right now, because they might have a champion in 3 weeks who, at any moment, could just disappear on them.
Well, let's talk about that fight, because it's obvious. I saw some people say, like, he didn't do anything that bad. Like, let's relax.
That's true.
But you have to remember, he's on probation,
right.
So it's different rules here. That's why he had to stay in jail for 2 nights until he saw a judge. It's different rules when you're on probation. But that being said, as you mentioned, He is scheduled to fight in 3 weeks. Should that fight still happen?
Jesus, I don't really know. That's a great question. That's one I haven't even really toyed with. That's a really great question. I guess so. You know, look, especially if it's Nevada. I mean, I know this is a jurisdiction in New Mexico for the crime itself, and the fight is in Nevada. But you know, when governments are willing to delay jail sentences to make sure they get that economic boost from fighting, it's like, how do you really draw a line in the sand after that? They'll let anything go forward, I suppose. But look, I think that's up to Jon's team and himself. But and look, this is a guy who can thrive in horrible conditions he has created for himself. He is the master of, I mean, you ask why he's never learned his lesson. Geez, like, why would he? I mean, at this point now he has to, but previously, why would he ever have any incentive to change anything, you know? It's only when life comes crashing down on him that he kind of plays catch up to the standard he's supposed to have already been at. So he might just wind up winning anyway. You know, I would say, look at the odds today. Have they moved in Cormier's favor? They have not.
Well, I was actually talking to some people close to him as far as the team is concerned, and they were saying that they were actually getting, because Jon's training camp for this fight has lasted like 6 months. And remember, he used to start training camps completely out of shape. They were saying in a perfect world, they actually wanted him to take some time off. Now, they didn't want him to take that time off in jail, but he was going very hard, and there's still 3 weeks left. So there is a game to play, as we know from covering this sport. You don't want to go full throttle and actually burn out before the fight. Actually, Cormier talked about that happening to him prior to UFC 182. So if you're a coach, you're like, all right, I guess it was good he had some time off, but what's going on up here now? The last 48 hours, the number one contender of the UFC, headlining the next pay-per-view, was incarcerated. That's a big problem, right? I mean, as a coach, I would be concerned. Like, you have to have a talk now with him and be like, where are we at mentally here? You know, Jon has won. He talked about this in the interview back in November. I mean, when he fought Alexander Gustafsson that week, he did not take that fight seriously at all. And I know some people don't want to believe that, but he was doing a lot of immature things that week. He talked about that now. He opened up to that, and he still won the fight. It was a close fight, but he still won. How long can you get away with this for? You know, this is not the time to be doing this anymore.
I mean, if you're talking, we were talking about Jon Jones, the person, the human being, the father, you know, all of the outside the cage stuff. But if you're talking about Jon Jones, the fighter, you know, I mean, I don't know that this is going to derail him. It very well might. We might be eating our words in a few weeks. But think about it. Back when he was back before he had his big scare, he was, by his own admission, using substances and partying like crazy. He claims that he's not partying anymore. He had that breathalyzer in his car, so he couldn't even start the car again without blowing into the breathalyzer. So we can assume then that he was sober when he got stopped in Albuquerque last week. So we can. So I guess it's safe to assume that that a lot of cleaning up of his act has occurred in terms of what he's doing to his body. This distraction adds something, but I don't know whether that would counterbalance against all of the cleaning up that he's done to his lifestyle.
So do you think the fight should happen? Like, if you're the UFC,
if I'm the UFC, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure that I would cancel a fight, but I would be, if I'm Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta, I am holding my breath. And I'm not just holding my breath to April 23rd to make sure something doesn't happen before that. I'm holding my breath for the next year. Because really, he's on probation for another year. And so if he goes out there and wins that fight, you've got pretty much a year from that point on where your champion is one misstep away from going to prison. And it doesn't have to be a big misstep either.
Yeah.
I will say that if there's one thing you're not going to do is doubt him as a competitor, because there's absolutely no reason to doubt him as a competitor to this point. I mean, he's been the most dominant champion, 8 title defenses, and realistically he's 22-0, right? Like the Matt Hamill thing. But it's like he's literally destroyed just about everybody he's got in there with the exception of Gustafsson maybe, and that was because, like you were saying, he might have been taking that one a little too lightly. I just think that a guy masquerading, I guess, from his point of view, with his belt and going around and making those rounds, he wants that fight. I have no doubt he'll show up and look like Jon Jones on fight night. I just think that, you know, it's more of a how is it deteriorating for him in general, like his whole life. But I still think the competitor, who is 28 years old right now, he's still in his prime. He looks great. I think he wants that fight. I feel like if the fight goes forward, which I'm assuming it will, he's going to look every bit like the Jon Jones we saw last time.
One thing we do have to acknowledge that we have made assumptions in the past about dominant fighters. I mean, look, Ronda Rousey, whoever thought that she was going to be undone in the fight the way she was undone. That was a shocker to a lot of people. but we can attach that to there were certain physical things that Holly Holm could do to her that we hadn't really expected her to be able to do, and she did it. In this one, we already saw Jones and Cormier fight, and we saw who was the guy who was the better fighter in that contest. So this is a revisiting of that, and it's hard to imagine the result going the other way unless Jon is so mentally broken down, and it just seems as though he's at this point maybe incapable of being mentally broken down because he just makes excuses for everything that goes wrong, and it's not about him. It's about the cop who pulled him over. It's about this or that. And if he was ever going to get broken down mentally, it was going to be after running a red light, crashing into a car.
That was a long time ago. He's fighting in 3 weeks.
Right, but I'm saying that's when this stuff. That's when this when he would have been really mentally broken down, because that was a time when something he almost killed. Theoretically could have killed somebody. This was just, whether you believe him or the cop, it was either him, goofing around drag racing or him just revving his engine, whatever. It was a minor thing. I don't know that, maybe the 2 nights in prison is going to make a difference. I just don't think it will.
Okay, what about the somewhat unprecedented move on his part to actually announce this himself? I mean, tell me right here, when has an athlete ever announced that he was arrested? He wasn't arrested. He was pulled over. Because the arrest came the next day.
That was the smartest play. That was the new.
Did you like that? I mean, look.
Did I like it? It doesn't.
No, because I think there's something to be said there that he is.
He's delusional. Yeah.
Why delusional? He shouldn't have said it?
Well, saying it, not saying it, it's PR strategy. I'm not on his PR team.
What did you think? I was conducting the interview. He comes out with that.
Right.
I'm like, what?
I know. I was listening. I was like, oh, for real?
So this, and I thought how he said it was like, look, I'm trying to be more honest. I'm trying to be more real. Like, we've accused him of that.
I mean,
to actually, no? You don't think?
But it also tends toward calculation as well, because, obviously she's softening a blow,
Was that the right move, though?
He's painting perception first.
The right move was not getting into trouble, not whatever PR excuse he's got to come up with after the fact.
We've debated on this show, Jon Jones, how he should handle himself in public and all that.
I said this before when he had the comeback. It was before your video, like when this all went down. Either he is going to change or he is not going to change. Either he is going to be unable to manage his life and this will go down like the Hindenburg, or he will find a way to right the ship. Nothing about going on your show either beforehand or after it is going to change that, even if his motivations are sincere.
You don't think it was interesting that he actually broke the news himself?
I think he's just trying to play damage control, man. I don't think it's anything more than that. And that's fine, play damage control.
And let's call it what it is then, if that's what you think it is. I was just curious to hear from a guy who in the past has hid things from us to actually come out and say it. Who knows, maybe he's on in jail this week if he doesn't say it, right?
Well, we'll say this. He also, if you remember in the video of him with the cop, at one point, pretty early on, he says, "Oh, is that thing on?" Meaning the camera on the cops. So he was aware that was all being videotaped. So this is a little different than just having a policeman pull you over and you give him a license maybe somehow the news comes out. But he had to know that video was going to be out there at some point because it would be a public record.
What did you make of the back and forth between him and the cop? Did he make it worse for himself? Was the cop being rude to him?
Yes,
a lot of debate about.
Yes, both. I mean, the cop was unprofessional, but I don't think I saw somebody. Maybe it was Kevin Ioli was suggesting that in a story on Yahoo, he was suggesting that the cop's unprofessionalism was what was prompting Jones to become irate, and I don't think that was the case. I felt as though that was not the cause and effect. I felt as though the cop was professional at first. Whether you want to argue that he should have been pulled over or not been pulled over, whatever. He approached him, asked him for license, registration, yada yada yada, and Jones then started contesting things with him. And at a certain point, with Jones coming at him, that's when the cop lost his professionalism. And I thought the cop was wrong. I thought he was being unprofessional, and he made it worse. But look, if you're Jon Jones, if you're anybody, is there anything to be gained by talking back to a cop and calling him a effing liar and a pig? I mean, I haven't heard that since the 60s. I mean, come on.
That seemed like
you don't listen to enough rap music.
That seemed like a guy who was frustrated and had enough and probably thought that this was going to become a big deal. Like it seemed like he was just.
I've been pulled over for things that I have not done.
Right, but you had not been pulled over the week before.
But that makes it worse because if
totally.
You're on probation. You just had one little thing that could have derailed you thrown away. And now you've gotten a clean slate, or as clean a slate as you possibly can have while you're still being on probation, and you're going to do this. I just feel like that was and if nothing else, if he already didn't have a target on him in terms of the Albuquerque police, do you think the next time the Albuquerque police sees a white Corvette ride down the road, they're not going to be thinking, oh, it looks like that thing, that light, that blinker is not working, or that come on.
We've come a long way from the Shogun Hua fight when he chased down a robber in Patterson. I mean, you think about back then what the perception of Jon Jones was to where we're at right now. What a crazy ride.
I don't think I just want to be clear about this. I think there's no value, or very little value, to be derived in trying to examine these individual instances he has. Did he talk to the cop appropriately? Like, I don't know. I'm not working policing. It seemed like the policing was okay at best, not horrible, not great.
It was a little weird when he's like, "How do you sleep at night?" And the officer's like, "On my side."
Okay.
It seemed like he was trying to.
Have you ever called an officer a pig during a traffic stop?
No.
I've had contentious traffic stops. I have never called a police officer a pig to his face.
Right.
Coincidentally, I've never been in jail. Now there might be a correlation. I don't know. But the point being is, look. This is a guy, so for example, I went to boot camp, Marine Corps boot camp, Paris Island, June 1998. I remember like a few weeks in, some of those guys get buyer's remorse, and they tell you there's two ways you're getting off the island. Either you graduate a Marine or through your dead body, because you're just going to spend your time in jail. That's not quite exactly true if you don't want to participate. But the point being is, if you don't participate, if you don't buy into the instructions, they remove you from the population, and you eventually get a discharge, and not a completely dishonorable way, but not a great way either. It's bad for your record, so don't do that. But you don't have to obey their rules. They tell you to jump, you can just ignore them. You can tell the drill instructor to go F off. It only works as a molding purpose to make you a different person if you buy into the system. That is it. All the shouting, all the yelling, all the getting up at 5 a.m. does not mean anything until you buy into the idea. And to me, it is not a coincidence that after all that's happened, we are not accusing of Jon Jones of revving his engine in his Dodge Omni. Nope, he's in a white Corvette, which is what's wrong with driving a white Corvette? Nothing, except you are telling the police, look at me. Hey, you're telling the world to look at you. He does not seem to understand how to manage his life.
And think about he had 5 tickets. The one that was telling to me was the one for having, I don't know exactly what the wording it was, but it was having a loud muffler. So if you want to sort of fly under the radar, what would you do? Would you want to have a car that you can rev, that you can hear blocks away? No, you want to have.
He's like Bub Rub.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's as though he. I mean, I don't know that it's. I'm not sure that he's doing such bad things, but it's just when you are in a situation like he is in, you need to go beyond just acting normal and acting like a citizen of the city. You need to act exemplary in order to get past it. Otherwise, forget it.
He was so close at that press conference. He was getting all the cheers, coming out with the belt. He was so close to turning that corner.
I wonder what it'll be like now.
I know.
Right?
I think it'll be mixed.
You think it'll be mixed? More mixed than before, because before it was all in his favor. And what will they say to Cormier, who almost seems like he's been trying to warn us of this behavior? Okay, let me ask you about this, because this is interesting now from a media perspective. I saw you tweet, and this is something that we talked about back in April when this happened for the first time, about the Albuquerque Police Department really liking to get stuff out there to the media. And the way I viewed it was, yeah, that's true. I mean, I remember back in April when we were trying to get all over this story, they were very accessible, and they would respond to texts and emails and all that stuff. And I loved it. I mean,
it's good for us.
It's great for us. So what's the problem? What's your issue with them?
Because, look, and everyone's going to go, downvote Luke for saying this.
Go ahead.
Downvote, it doesn't change the facts on the ground. The facts on the ground is Albuquerque PD for the last 20 years is noted, documented by our own Department of Justice. They have been sued by local news organizations. They've been sued by other advocacy groups. Their policing is one of the worst in the country. It's a population of over 500,000 people, and the terms of the police violence on their citizenry in terms of murders, both shooting and non-lethal, is 10 times the rate of New York City. They've been sued for withholding body camera evidence. When body cameras were first introduced to August in 2010, and then eventually in the full police force in 11 and 12, they had a brand called Scorpion that allowed them to delete whatever they wanted off the videos before turning them in at night. They've been sued for not giving body camera footage when it could have exonerated somebody, and they had to get sued for it, which is a waste of taxpayer money. So you mean to tell me they will hold onto and delete footage when it's convenient to them, and when they have an officer, I admittly, being treated unfairly by Jon, there's no doubt about it. He shouldn't talk to, call him a pig just is not in your best interest. I'll put it that way. And they were, greased lightning,
Yeah.
that thing came out the door. And we mean to say, these are just Barney Fife Boy Scouts out there to serve and protect. How naive are you? What world do you live in where you think the police are like down the middle arbiters? They have interest in this as well, and their interest is in making him look bad because he's made them look bad, and he's a nuisance to them, clearly.
I want to feel
It's
shocked.
so clear.
I want to feel shocked that you know that much about the Albuquerque Police Department,
Yeah.
but for some reason I don't.
You know what? It's amazing. It's amazing if you just read a little bit about this. People think it's
know.
like this is Mayberry, and golly,
know.
they're just trying to make sure the kids get across the street without getting hit by cars.
You know, when you take that cross-country drive you're talking about, I think you might want to take a right turn up, go through
I'm
Colorado.
sure. Look, and I'm sure there's going to be people. I'm going to get angry emails about this, and you can send
About
them too.
what?
People think this is some that I turned into Mubia Abu Jamal, where now I hate all police officers. It's got nothing to do with this. I'm sure there are very fine police officers and detectives and administrators to that entire police department, but it is categorically undeniable they have been cited year over year for failure to do their job effectively and frankly ethically.
I do feel like they're all like looking out for Jon Jones at this point.
Yeah,
the way
I mean-
the tone was in that.
Should probably change his car
Yeah,
at
yeah.
this point. Would you
Yeah, I
want
was
to
just
say?
going to say that looking at it from the perspective of the police, here's a guy who has runs a red light, rams into a car, causes bodily injury to a pregnant woman, and then runs off and conveniently does not reappear for more than 24 hours, at which time it is no longer possible to test him for any substances that he might or might not have been on while he
Well,
was
this
driving.
might be an unpopular opinion, but in hindsight, maybe running away was the best thing Jon Jones ever did,
it was
right?
in terms of
if that is the case, right?
Well, exactly for him. But if you're a cop, you're human, and you're thinking
Sure.
this guy's a jerk, and we got to look out for him. So next thing you get an opportunity, then he goes and he gets probation. Doesn't even go to jail. Then they pull him over, give him 3 more tickets. That stuff all gets thrown out. So I mean, not to say that they are or they aren't targeting him, but there's no question that when the officer realized that the guy who he just pulled over is Jon Jones, he probably was a little bit happy that he pulled him over and was going to give him some tickets. And maybe he wasn't going to give him that taillight ticket if Jones didn't give him some grief back. So I mean, part of it is what Luke's saying is true, but there's also just that human element of the cops see these guys, not just Jones, but a lot of other people do stuff, and then it gets either thrown out of court or it doesn't go anywhere, or a guy doesn't go to prison. He gets probation, and then when that guy appears in their crosshairs again, they go after him. And that's what Jon Jones has to realize. I mean, I think I tweeted something out the other day, and people wondered why I said this, but I felt like the first thing that Jones should have done when he got out of jail today was go see a realtor if he owns a house in Albuquerque and get the hell out of there. I mean, because he is not a guy who, I'm not going to say he's unsafe on the streets. I don't feel like some harm is going to befall him, but I do believe that if I was Jon Jones, I would not be hanging around that city. I'd be somewhere else.
The last thing I was going to say about that is, going back before he was ever in too much trouble, there was one guy who kind of made a comment. It was his coach, Greg Jackson, who said, the one guy who can beat Jon Jones is going to be Jon Jones. I still remember that, him saying it, because it was sort of at the time, it was like, you're thinking well, he must know another Jon Jones, because so far he hasn't really been in any kind of trouble. Or maybe he'd just been in, whatever, just kid stuff. But the bottom line was that's really come to pass, and it's kind of ironic that it's all happening right there in Greg Jackson's town of
Oh yeah, I remember when he won the belt at UFC 128, and kind of out of nowhere, Dana White was talking about the the people that are going to come towards him now, the leeches and things like that. And he doesn't say that after he didn't say that about Holly Holm when she won the belt, or Ronda Rousey, but it was interesting that he pinpointed that. Must have been something that he saw in Jon, or his behavior, or maybe his immaturity. And isn't it interesting, when he moved to Albuquerque full time, we all said, oh, this is great. Now he's going to be around the coaches. But now it seems like he's become somewhat of a target.
Because you thought he was going to buy in.
Right.
You thought that was the buying in, and it was only halfway or 2/3 or whatever the fraction is buying in.
And think about the guys, Jackson, Wink, Jim. There's a lot of tough guys there. Not every one of them is an altar boy. And do we hear stuff about those guys all getting, we don't see Cowboy Cerrone getting, walking around in an orange jumpsuit. We don't see any of those other guys who, we think of sort of as badass guys. Those guys somehow find a way to toe the line. Why can't Jon Jones do that? Because he's not grown up. Because I think you earlier said, when is he going to change? I would alter that to say, when is he going to grow up? I mean, he's 28 years old. I don't feel as though it's a matter of changing in the way that an adult who's gone astray is. I think it's growing up because I just don't think he's ever done it.
Just gonna say real quickly, this is all Jon's fault. Just the police thing aside.
And by the way, I wasn't
it's
criticizing the police. I was talking about from a media perspective.
Sure.
I like more information.
I understand. It's fine. It works for us. It makes things better. It's Jon's fault. Jon would be doing this probably whatever city he was in. It also just so happens he's doing it in a city where the police force is all too happy to accommodate him falling on his own sword.
But I will agree. What a sight that was this morning to see him wearing that orange suit and chained, and then seeing the other inmates behind him. Some real sort of.
Is he going to get any kind of trouble because of making an official appearance without a Reebok?
Come
Look at this
on,
guy.
a little too soon, Jeff. Come on. Where's the
I
compassion?
didn't say it. He was going to say it.
Where's the sympathy? Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We're 3 weeks away. Also, I mean, how much do they talk about it? Is this mentioned on the Countdown show?
How do you avoid this?
They did that really good, I think they called it Battle Lines, but this was for Bisping Silva, so I don't know if it was just for a Fight Pass show, but when they did that 30-minute special, they talked about the drug stuff with Anderson Silva. I will say, though, I don't know if you guys noticed this, and I tend to, for some reason, pay attention to this social media nonsense. It did feel very tone deaf. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I don't know if you guys, and it's the next one, they have to promote it. The UFC was promoting a lot of Jon Jones stuff in the midst of all of it. All of this going on. The guy's incarcerated now. He's in jail, and we're promoting like videos of him and interviews and things like that. Like, maybe we should just take a step back from the Jon Jones story a little bit, or come out and put out an article about it. But it just felt weird that everyone was pretending that this thing wasn't happening. That like the guy fighting for this belt, the guy that we are promoting, is actually locked up right now. Maybe it's not the best time to be promoting that fight 3 weeks away. No? Yes.
Great.
I mean, if you're going to promote the fight,
Promote the fight. Yeah, well, then it should be talked about on the Countdown show.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do, but I don't.
Countdown show, cops, one of those
I
fights.
don't know. How are you going to? I don't know. Jeez, Louise.
All right.
You hear that?
Let's see what happens. We'll move along.
You of all people, come on.
I have delicate sensibilities, Jeff.
Yesterday, Wednesday, it was officially announced that UFC 200 will be headlined by Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz at 170 pounds. No comments.
Good thing I broke that story.
I saw that tweeted out like about 6:58 last night.
No. That was 2 weeks ago, actually, that I reported it. Anyway, that's a discussion for a different time.
March 18th, if you want the exact who's counting. Whatever.
Now that it's out there, it's been 2 weeks now. Have we moved on? How do we feel? It's a real thing. I tried to tell you guys. I tried to warn you even before.
Wait, how do you feel about the fight, or UFC 200?
Okay. Let's put it all together. Fair enough. Because now there are more fights being officially announced. We knew all of them, I think, except for the Jim Miller Takanori Gomi fight. Frankie Edgar versus Jose Aldo is also on the card. The whole package as it stands. And credit to Dave Schaller of the UFC PR staff, who put you in your place as you were trying to be negative Nancy.
No, I wasn't. He actually misread my intentions. I was saying that the UFC has moved on to a new era of just changing the way they promote fights. They're not worried about these little, straps around the belts. That stuff doesn't mean anything.
So
it's all about the money fights now. And I know I'm always arguing against that stuff.
Yeah.
But now, I've learned that the wisdom. I have a new guru, and his name is Nate Diaz. And when I was sitting there meditating in front of him, he started talking about the belts are.
Check this guy's out.
He's like the belts, but if the belts are fairy tales, and I sat there. That was my new mantra: fairy tales. And I actually.
So you like this?
Well, I'm not going to say I like it, but I guess I'm adjusting to looking at it as a new way. This is the way that these things are going to happen now. The belts, I'm somewhat inclined to not even acknowledge that this person is the champion in that division or that person's champion. I feel as though the belts are somewhat insignificant now. They're maybe just props for hyping up a fight. But
is that good though?
Well, I don't like it, but that's just because I'm old school about these things. But I'm realizing this is the reality now. The reality now is the belts don't mean anything. It's about who is who can we get to, what are the best fights we can put together, and they're also going to sell. That's really what matters.
Okay, so is this the best card that they could put together?
Well, I mean,
as it stands right now, there's still some more things. Dana White's promising some mind-blowing stuff.
Multiple.
Yes. So as it stands right now, though, how do you feel about the card?
I don't mind. I mean, I've had time to process it. I understand what you're saying, but there's so much that goes into it. One thing is, this is mostly a Conor McGregor thing, right? Like, this is all Conor McGregor. It's not like all the belts are no longer meaningless. This is Conor McGregor who sort of has jumped ship, and now they're doing this arbitrary weight of 170. Really, that's been the only big sticking point for me, is why are they keep that random number? Why are they meeting there again instead of 155 where Nate Diaz was and where McGregor intended to go? That's the big sticking point for me. If you're going to do it again, at least have it mean something to that division where you think he might end up. But I don't know. I think it's a McGregor thing, and as soon as they got numbers back on that last Diaz fight that was, I guess, did better than UFC 100, well, that sort of changes the game.
I don't know about that, but
well,
it did very well.
It did very well, or whatever it was close to that. And if you're getting that sort of number, that also is an echo of what people want to watch. And I feel like for this fight card, because the whole Ronda Rousey thing was supposed to take place, couldn't, and everything else, I feel like, in some ways, in retrospect, I feel like this might be the best route for them. I just wish it was 155 pounds. But I will say that the interim title fight, if we're getting into that introduces a whole different strangeness to this, because you have the two guys who are campaigning, and then you got them fighting for an interim title, and it's and then the guy that's fighting on the main card is sort of, it's like rubbing it in their face.
I gotta say, that fight makes no sense. I am shocked that those two fighters agreed to that fight. To be on that card, fighting for an interim belt, when the actual champion is also fighting on the card in a different weight class and will be walking around with the belt. I don't necessarily hate the fight. They have to remain active. They need to eat. They need to get paid. I get that. But why are you fighting on that card? You are going to be made to look like bridesmaids. You're going to be made to look like fighting for a fake title. Why did you agree to fight on that card? You don't get pay-per-view points, so it's not like it benefits you by fighting at UFC 200. To put Frankie Edgar and Jose Aldo on that card, it, to me, is almost insulting to them. They should not be fighting on that card. They should be headlining 201.
What if they? I mean, I just got done saying the belts don't matter, but in the putting on the UFC hat. What if they changed? What if they made that fight and said, well, Conor is vacating because he is now fighting for the second straight time at a different weight class. We're gonna introduce a new champion.
Shouldn't be in the spotlight, or in the shadows, I should say, of Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor is going to be going to those press conferences. He is the biggest star in the sport. He will dominate them. Everyone will ask him questions. And people ask Nate too. Nate has become a gigantic star as well. Frankie and Jose are going to sit there looking like, they're fighting for second place.
In some ways, though, I look at that the press conferences beforehand, they get a little more interesting, don't they? On some level, you got these guys who can't stand Conor McGregor, who've been
What are they going to do? And especially those two guys, they're not going to talk bad about him.
Thing, right? Like McGregor's going to incite it because that's what he does.
I think there's a greater context here that should be established. If you think about what's the difference between UFC 200 and UFC 100, boy, quite a bit. If you really think about it. Number one, UFC 100 was the 11th event that year. The 11th event this year will be UFC 197, which will take place in the third week of April. They hit that one. UFC 100 was in July. So I think, just mechanically speaking, it is a much more difficult task to make UFC 200 than it was to make UFC 100. It is a much more complicated endeavor. You have more weight classes. You have much more broader and challenging calendar issues related to MSG and things like that. So simply one-to-one, you can't compare them. They only had 5 weight classes back then. They didn't have the WEC guys back then. Those guys didn't fight on those cards at that point.
So shouldn't it be easier to make a better card now with the women and the weight classes?
Because as your assets have grown, so have your demands. You have much more to do. They only had 5 international events in 2009, and the 2 that came before it, the 2 events that came before UFC 100 were an Ultimate Fighter, US versus UK, the Bisping-Henderson show, and then that one off with Marquardt and Okami in Cologne, Germany. In other words, it was a much more straightforward task about how to resource your opportunities for a big card. Now they have got any number of different demands and all these different pieces. The complexity of the scale has made it much more difficult to do, and that also dovetails with what they're talking about. It's not merely that you have all these other structural problems in place. It is also that in the current time in which we live, there is this weird weight class jumping, make fights that are utterly unnecessary but commercially viable to fill in all the gaps. That was a thing they never did back then. So it was much more linear matchmaking about how to do things.
I don't hate the card though. I
don't hate the card either. I'm just saying.
I think the criticism of the card, especially when every fight gets announced or reported, people are like, "This isn't UFC 200 worthy." Let's go back to UFC 100. There were a lot of fights on that card. I mean, John Fitch versus Paulo Thiago was on the main card, and this
that was a good fight back then, though.
Yeah, but this wasn't revisionist history. That wasn't a sexy. That was an anything fight. That was an anywhere anything fight. That wasn't like when when Diego Sanchez versus Joe Lozon gets announced and people are like, this isn't 200 worthy, well, what is? Like, what are you expecting? There has to be a card here. Every single fight on the card thus far features some kind of name. Even this new Sage Northcutt fight, he's a name, and he's going to be on the bottom of the card. If you have Travis Brown and Cain Velasquez fighting perhaps on the FS1 prelims, that's not the worst thing in the world. I think every single fight on this card is fun. Like Gaslam Hendricks, that's fine. I'm cool with that. The only one is that one fight that I feel like, and I don't even have a problem with the fight. I just don't think that they should be fighting in the shadows of Conor McGregor on the same night as him. That's the problem that I have. And oh, by the way, let's look at UFC 198. I mean, UFC, and we could get into this 198-200 thing. I mean, that to me might be the best card that Zuffa has put on in the last 5 years. Why? Because it is perfect for that market. They got Shogun, Curitiba Zone.
It's the best overseas card ever.
But it's like, this is how you promote events. You have a market, you say, who's the best fighter to put on that card in front of those people? Curitiba Zone Shogun, Curitiba Zone Anderson Silva, and Curitiba Zone Cyborg. This is brilliant. And the heavyweight champion who's Brazilian, that's how you build a card, as opposed to just plugging holes and things of that nature. Like 198 is just, from promotional malpractice, this is the opposite of promotion.
Sure.
It's the perfect.
It's best practice.
It's the best. Yes, I love that card, just the way that they constructed it. That being said, Cyborg should be at 200. Cyborg should be fighting on 200. That's a special attraction. That's a special thing.
Against Leslie Smith?
Anyone. She should be fighting on that card, in my opinion.
I just feel
So I know that's contradictory.
The top two fights, for me, it's like being an unnecessary fight in and of itself is not the worst qualification that you can have a fight being. Lots of good fights are quite unnecessary. But when you have that juxtaposed with a fight that seems, I mean, if a belt is to mean anything, it is that it is validated and held by the best. To have this weird Diaz rematch while the other two guys who could conceivably fight for what is a much more necessary bout play this weird game where they eliminate their chances at the fight they both need. It's not. Look, is there anything wrong with a Frankie Edgar and a Jose Aldo fighting?
No.
Not
They were
any time.
gonna match
Except
it.
it's just.
They were
Jeez,
gonna
it seems
fight.
awful unnecessary.
They were going to fight anyway at some point. I mean,
Maybe.
right?
Yeah, maybe with one of
At
them has
some
the
point.
title, not
And
this interim.
exactly.
nonsense.
No, I think that this fight, the Edgar Aldo fight, should be for the featherweight championship. There's nothing wrong with Conor McGregor vacating that belt. He can always talk about, well, I could beat those guys. He can still talk about it, but at least your belt has some significance. If you want it to have significance, clearly the UFC doesn't really care if the belt has significance because they're giving these two guys a shot at something that means nothing. It's it's empty. McGregor could then decide he wants to drop back down and fight the guy and regain the belt that I surrendered, and he can go back and fight Edgar or Aldo, whoever wins that thing. I think that they've basically taken an opportunity, and this also could have been like we're gonna. This is the new Conor McGregor who's now gonna go in and take on all the lightweights. I mean, the whole idea of it being at 170 pounds also removes that part of it because McGregor logically should be now attacking all the lightweights. And I know that Chuck touched on this earlier. We heard Dana White talk about how McGregor insisted on it being at 170
What do you
pounds.
think of that?
And well, we heard John Kavanaugh tweeting earlier that the UFC insisted on it. So already we don't know where that came from. So,
But how about this idea that Dana said on SportsCenter that we went to speak to him and he's
Right.
like, I want to fight this fight and I want to fight it at 170, which speaks to, we talked about this last week, like the whole playground thing where he's like, I just want to run it back. I don't care
Right.
about anything else. That's cool, but how about the fact that he's calling the shots now? Isn't this a shift from what we've been hearing forever that we make the best fights and we're the ones in charge and things like that? It's amazing, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I think Dana said something along the lines of we gave him this because of what he's done, and I think that's fine too. When a fighter has stepped up, and he has. I mean, when Aldo fell out, he stepped up and fought Mendez. When RDA fell out, he stepped up and fought Diaz. All credit to him for doing that. And I think that if he wants to then have a fight that really means something to him, and by all accounts, this means something to him, bigger than going back and defending his title against Frankie Edgar. This is more important. He wants to get back that loss to Diaz. That's fine. Go ahead and do it. Say, absolutely, we'll book that fight. But if you're going to take a second fight out of your weight class, we need to have you vacate the belt and make it available. And we also want this to make some sense. Let's fight it in Nate Diaz's actual weight class. So you can't just say, well, you could say, sure, we're going to give him some concessions by letting him have the fight he wants, but then to say, well, we're letting him fight at 170 because that's what he wanted, and we're letting him keep the belt because that's what he wanted. Well, you're right. Who is running the show? We've joked about this being the McGregor Fighting Championship, and now it's becoming, the reality, except for the championship part, because the championships mean nothing anymore because they don't respect the UFC does not respect the titles anymore. So why don't we just call it the UF and forget the championship? Forget that word.
I wonder if part of the disgruntled outcry about UFC 200 so far has been about there not being that bombshell. I feel like sometimes that they're like we mentioned a couple weeks ago, they got to have something up their sleeve. I'm not sure that Aldo and Edgar was the thing that they had up their sleeve. I feel like people are waiting to see them put that weird element to it. I mean, if it's a title shot, like a title fight or something else that's going to be that extra thing that's going to draw everybody in, you know what I'm saying? I keep waiting for that, and I think that's why it feels a little weird. The two fights so far at the top are both rematches, and I know that UFC 100 featured a rematch, but it was also a rematch that had a lot of stakes, because it was for the title, and the way the first fight went down.
It was a year and a half in the making.
Yeah, and it was a year and a half in the making. That was a very anticipated thing. This thing was cobbled back together. It's sort of at the same arbitrary weight. It's like somehow it's missing the mark. It'll still do well, but it's missing the mark in terms of that sort of like that sort of reason to tune in. And then the fight you just mentioned being for interim, I feel like we're still waiting for some kind of bombshell fight to be added to this that will fill in the rest of it. You know what I mean? Make the whole thing as a whole seem big.
Very quickly, just tiny point.
No, go ahead.
UFC 199, UFC 200, back-to-back fight cards with the co-main and the main are all rematches.
Right.
You cannot tell me we are not living in an era where there are gratuitous amounts of rematches.
And there's a lot more on the horizon.
Well, should they embrace that for 200? You got Conor.
It's fine if you embrace it for 200, but for 190, I mean, a point being is you can pick which ones you don't want to do, but aggregately, there's no way to view this picture and to say we might be having a few too many rematches.
You could put Misha and Holly on that card. You could put Condit Lawler.
There are plenty of good rematches to make those. Why are we having Diaz? Why are we? I mean, just on its face, the main event. It's a fine fight. There's nothing wrong with it. It makes zero sense.
This is my theory as to why people are reacting to the card as it stands right now, and I do hope that they have a rabbit that they're going to pull out and show it and tell the media that we were all overreacting. I hope for the fans' sake, for everyone's sake. I think that people view UFC 100 and 200, and also important to note that this really isn't the 200th event in UFC history. It's a nice thing. It's a cool thing to celebrate. It's at a new arena, but yes, important to note that in my opinion. I think that people view those events, those milestones, as kind of like, and I say this because it's this weekend, block your ears, like a WrestleMania. And what did people love about WrestleMania back in the day? That there was a year-long build. Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, when they met at the Pontiac Silverdome, it was a year-long build to that, and it all exploded in front of 70, blah, blah, blah. They claim it was 90 or so, but it was really 70 or so thousand people. And this feels like it's a 3-month build. This is a rematch of a fight that came together on 11 days' notice back in February. Edgar Aldo was never going to happen if Conor fought Edgar for the belt or Aldo for the belt. It all kind of feels like fights that were put together given the landscape. UFC 100 felt like it was a year-long build. Brock and Mir, that rematch was a year-long build. Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping, they went through tough to get to that point. USA versus UK. GSP versus Alvarez, there was a long stretch between GSP fought in January at 94, UFC 94 against BJ, and then he fights 7 months later. So
I think
it felt like,
right? Like
they tried, the best laid plans.
It's like Holly Holm kicked the needle off that record, right? Like the whole thing happened. They were trying to build it. They were going to christen the new arena. They were going to have Ronda Rousey do it. A lot of us thought maybe it was going to be Cyborg. Or can you imagine if that had come together at UFC 200? We would have had the event, but I just felt like that changed everything.
We've been talking about this card for a year.
They've told us to.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So that's why I feel like fans are reacting this way. I have no doubt on July 9th, a lot of people will be watching.
It should be clear. It's a good card. That's a great card. It's just a weird card. It's a weird card.
I think this is why people are reacting this way because they
order.
This guy.
I don't get it. What's the?
That was the tweet from yesterday that got shot.
Oh yes,
It's true though. This is.
Does it break UFC 100? Do you think? Like, is the sport bigger now?
I'm told that if you ask casuals, MMA fans, they like this McGregor-Diaz rematch, which I'm sure, of course, plays into the thinking about it. So I don't know. I'm sure it would be commercially do really well. 1.6, Brock Lesnar. It's a record for a reason. I don't think so.
I kind of feel like the public has come to terms with the rematch and when it was reported 2 weeks ago, there was a much bigger outcry. Now they're kind of like, all right, it's happening. I feel like people have warmed up to the idea.
It's not going to be a bad fight. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be bad.
It will be interesting to see their dynamic leading up to the fight. Now that Conor is, the guy who's coming off the loss, I think. And I wanted to note this last week.
Sing your song. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, exactly. What a great song that is.
Shout love from the hood.
What about Nate Diaz? Can we just talk about that for a second? And I meant to talk about this last week. He has become such a media darling. And isn't it such an amazing thing to see?
Did you see his Jerry Rice story?
The Jerry Rice story was
so good.
Was great. He talked to the buzzer on FoxSports.com about how he was the biggest Jerry Rice fan growing up. He sees Michael Irvin at the Super Bowl party, doesn't want to say hi to him because he wants to stay true to his guy, Jerry Rice. And then he sees after that Jerry Rice was rooting for Conor McGregor on Twitter. Broke his heart as a longtime Niner fan. But there's just something about him, the way he tells his stories, his demeanor, his I don't give an F attitude. Who knew? I mean, I think we all knew that Nate was like this. He just needed to get comfortable in front of the camera and get
rude, right? Like both those guys.
He has this endearing quality to him that has just been so much fun to see come out for the world.
And mea culpa, he did not. I was fearful of that. Having to go before Nevada. Like his brother
yes,
did,
that's
and
right.
That did not come to
you
pass.
Doubted him.
Look at this guy, the buzz.
Hey, man. But you know what? Good for him. He found a way to navigate on short notice. Good for him. I mean, that shows some level of maturity. We think of as Nick and Nate as sort of these kids, but that shows some level of maturity to be able to go out and party in Cabo, and then still pass your.
Do you think that this trickles down to Nick? Like when Nick comes back, is he a bigger star now because of his brother? Because to a degree, Nick's popularity trickled down to Nate, right? When Nate was on The Ultimate Fighter 5, he was a big deal. People cared about him because he was Nick's younger bro. Now, can you make the case that Nate is the bigger star? Yeah, just because he's been more.
Now.
Yeah. I wonder what happens when Nick comes back. I think this does trickle down to him.
The Diaz brothers always, and most fighters are this way, but you really see these big peaks and valleys of the Diaz brothers. But I'll never forget how hot Nick Diaz was after he go-go-plotted Takanori Gomi. Everyone was talking about, not because it was a great fight, but also because it was just this marvelous performance from Nick Diaz. And you got something kind of similar. I mean, it was a short notice, and he didn't look good the first round, but then the way he just ran him over in the second round, mostly anyway, people had this, they just love the Diaz. People want to love the Diaz brothers. They need a grander purpose to do it. And so when they're winning these big fights, that's when everyone really just hops on board.
What's great about them too is you were talking about Nate, and especially in this McGregor fight, there's this moment where you see the taunts start to come in, where he starts to talk and he's doing the taunting. It's like the old Anderson Silva fights, right? When he started doing the dropping the hands and stuff, and you're like, oh, here we go. This is usually when he starts to come on offensively and take the guy apart. And it was traditionally true. We'd seen him do that a lot of times, but I felt like in that fight, as soon as you saw him do that, weathering through the first storm, the first round storm, and you see him slowly turn that thing, that was a lot of fun. That was sort of the vintage Diaz feel when you see him I've taken your punches and you're not going to put me away that way. And then now it's my turn. That sort of thing, that's a lot of fun to watch.
And this is the silver lining for that UFC 200. As much as we might say these are not the fights to make, Nate Diaz talked about, fairy tales and all that. This is he's going to get paid.
We're working ourselves around. We're going to pretty soon. This is the best fight.
He's going to make some money, and that's where the Conor McGregor effect is taking hold there. And there's a lot of things about it that I don't like. How the belts are diminished and blah blah blah, but the guy's getting paid. Nate Diaz is getting paid, and he also gets to put on a performance on a huge stage once again. And if he beats the guy a second time, sky's the limit.
This just goes to show that rigid model they have of the weight class, and the tenure and the linear matchmaking and the hierarchy and everything working through that. They're really good at promoting that. They're really good at using that. It's a very effective tool and general scheme that not in a bad way, but that's their strategy. That's their plan. It works well for them. And they haven't, I think, up until now, found a way to make use of guys who don't really fit that model all too tightly. But as they begin to let loose the reins a little bit, it's not in the UFC's interest to not promote Nate Diaz. Turns out when you promote him in ways that are effective to his interests, everybody wins. Yeah. And I think the UFC is slowly warming to that.
It's so fun to watch Nate Diaz make the rounds to studios and stuff.
Great.
This is a complete a strange thing to watch given who he is and all that stuff. And even on a UFC Tonight, I don't know if you guys caught when he was on there. That was pretty funny. I watched that on a loop for a while.
Yeah. He was asking about you. He came on and said, where are you at?
It's funny because people didn't think I was down with the 209, but now we're starting to recognize that.
One of those guys wanted to slap you, didn't they?
No, that was all games. That was all for the camera. I do hope that they don't stray too far away from that, because I always felt like that was in the UFC's best interest. The weight classes and everything was so neat, and it's so confusing in boxing that I felt like fans gravitated towards that.
No doubt.
I'm happy you brought up that Gomi fight, though, because I vividly remember sitting in a cubicle pre-MMA journalism days and watching a Sherdog post-fight interview, I believe conducted by Josh Gross, in the casino lobby after that fight with a busted up Nick Diaz talking about it, and he was holding the camera. It's kind of like shot like this, and I was like, this sport is so freaking cool that you could just get the guy who won this. I remember having this like almost epiphany, saying this is so cool that they're talking to him, and it's on the website, and I don't know, it's just that fight, and especially that post-fight interview.
Save it
really,
for the road to...
The highway to hell. There it is. Okay, let's just quickly end on Chris Cyborg, because you bring up the point that you don't have to always fit in boxes, and what better example than Cyborg's UFC debut on May 14th, UFC 198 against Leslie Smith. She's fighting at 140, a weight class that doesn't exist in the UFC. She's fighting Leslie Smith, and I think we can all agree, like, Leslie has that Diaz brother in her, right? I mean, she is a member of the Scrap Pack. She trains with Gilbert Melendez, and she has that fighting spirit. But is this the fight that we wanted for Chris Cyborg's debut? Is this the one? Like, Chris Cyborg is the best 145er in the world, and you can make a strong case that she's the best female fighter in the world. Should she be fighting Leslie Smith in her UFC debut? Does that make sense?
I think it's okay. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Is it the optimum choice? Probably not. There's probably some arguments you could make that there are some, probably a number of better fights. But it's not so categorically bad that we have to poo-poo it. It'll be in her hometown, Cyborg's hometown. It is her UFC debut. It's going to be in front of a sold-out crowd. That's, going to be a new challenge for her. She hasn't had a crowd like that in quite some time. Leslie Smith is, as you mentioned, gung-ho about the whole thing.
She does have to get down to 140 pounds, which is a big
is that an opponent in its own right for Cyborg? Like, we should give her she should not be fighting a Miesha Tate or a Holly Holm because of that?
If we find out that the 5-pound calibration doesn't have major consequences, okay, we can revisit it for the future matchmaking. But for this one, I like it. It's a little bit modest in how they are approaching the challenge, and I think in the end, we'll say, okay, that worked. I really believe that.
What do you think of it?
I would have liked for her to debut to be with just one notch above. I think that Leslie Smith does represent a notch above what Cyborg has been fighting to this point. So it is a little bit of a step up in competition, but I would have loved to seen her. I think we talked about this, like the big five of the women's division. I would love to seen her against one of those five top contenders. I know they're all contenders. Well, actually, I wouldn't include Miesha Tate. I don't think she should be fighting the champion, but of the other four,
I actually thought that fight made a lot of sense. Right?
Which one?
Because Miesha Tate versus Cyborg, because Tate has really nothing to lose in this fight. If she loses, she goes back to being the champion, and if she wins, she's probably beating the second biggest name in women's MMA outside of Ronda Rousey right now, right? I mean, Holly's probably a bigger name, but you know what I mean? Like, that felt like a 200 fight to me.
I mean, let's not pussyfoot around here. I mean, really, what I want to see is I want to see Cyborg and Rousey in there.
Okay,
but
fair enough.
We're not going to get that.
Maybe
maybe they're going to like.
Can Ronda stay true to her whole "I'm not moving up" thing anymore if she's not the champion, and this is now being done by other people?
Well, Leslie Smith has a lot less to lose.
Sure, of course.
Ronda Rousey has a tremendous amount to lose, but that, again, in and of itself, that is not a reason to not pursue fights, especially when there is both public demand and sporting legitimacy on the line, and I think there is.
If Cyborg wins and it coincides with Ronda's return, what would you rather see, say, at MSG? Ronda versus Holly 2 or Ronda Cyborg?
I'd still rather see Cyborg. Honestly,
really? Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, because I've wanted to see it for so long.
Sure.
But it's like, again, you're on some kind of new terms because you got Ronda Rousey coming back after a year and psychologically changed, and you don't know how much she'll change within her game. So there's a lot of reasons you might want to see her fight home, but I really believe her best route is to fight somebody outside of home to get her mojo back a little bit before she steps in there again. I don't know if Cyborg would be the right call for that, but you would like to. I'm still very intrigued by that fight, obviously. I just think that that's a fight that we've had on our radar, like you were mentioning Mir and Lesnar. I mean, we've talked about this fight for a couple of years, so to finally see it, it'd be like pinching yourself. Like, here we are, we're finally going to see who wins this fight. One quick thing on Leslie Smith, I'm okay with it, especially at 140, and I was a little surprised by the name. I mean, Leslie Smith, what you love about her is, like you said, she's like a Diaz brother. She's very game. I mean, we saw her lose part of her ear and like still want to fight and everything. But at the same time, that's also a reason you're like, ooh, this could be bad. I mean, I was kind of looking back, and she's 2-3 in the UFC, and her wins are against Rinnikai and Jessamine Duke, and you're like, it's just you wonder. how that's going to translate against somebody of Cyborg's caliber.
Yeah.
But hopefully she's able to show competitively in this fight. And I know that in her mind, she thinks she can get it done. I think a lot remains to be seen there.
And again, 198, kudos to the UFC on that one. And in particular, Giovanni Decker yesterday at the press conference saying that he's come to the realization, and maybe the UFC in general, that less events in Brazil means bigger events in Brazil, more important events, deeper cards. That's what they're doing now. They went to that well probably too many times after the success of 134, and now we see what we get with 198. What a card that is.
They did 7 Brazil shows in 2014 at places like Barueri, Uberlândia, Joraga, whatever, Del Sol.
Or John Anik.
This makes no sense. I should also say the fact that they've sold 32,000 tickets, maybe more at this point,
Yeah.
a sellout. And for folks who aren't paying attention, Brazil's economy is on the verge of a depression. There is 10% unemployment going on down there. Major political scandals.
Yeah.
The fact that you can sell at a soccer stadium, again, it's a stacked card. I like the idea of people don't have much money there right now. The economy is kind of shaky. We were doing too many shows. To me, this is a healthy retraction that makes everything better.
Yeah.
Less is more in a way.
And by the way, one last thing quickly before we go, I just got to get your thoughts. Crew Phil Nurse and Renzo Gracie training Shane McMahon for WrestleMania. Any closing comments on that?
We don't have enough time to cover this.
Okay,
so
fine. We're out of time.
I would rather have liquid Zika shot into my eyeballs.
This is big, though. I mean,
what does that even mean, training
Do
him?
you think
For
Nurse's Muay Thai will be able to neutralize The Undertaker's clinch game?
I wish for sweet death to just rain down hammers upon me. What have I done with my stupid... I'm here criticizing Jon Jones. What have I done with my stupid life that I have to talk about this for? God.
On that note, we will say goodbye. Thank you so very much for watching another episode of the show. The MMA train is kind of back. It was a quiet weekend, a rare quiet weekend last week, but there's World Series of Fighting this Saturday night on WSOF. For some reason, the main card is airing live at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time. But it is a
You'll
good
be
card.
asleep.
I will be fast asleep. David Branch defending his title against Clifford Starks, his middleweight title, and also John Fitch fighting.
Right,
for
João Zeferino.
Yeah, the vacant welterweight title, the Husimar Palhares welterweight title. But John Fitch could finally become a champion by Saturday night. And then, of course, WrestleMania 32, this man will be watching. No doubt about it.
Twitter will be insufferable.
Yes. For now, though, we say goodbye. We will be back next week. Thank you so much for watching. That is Luke. That is Jeff. That is Chuck. I am Ariel. We'll see you next time. Enjoy your weekend.